dosim iespēju runāt nākamajam prezentētājiem, Jacobam Dekras, so leading expert, main guide, so ļoti zinošs cilvēks katrā ziņā. Un viņš arī mums pastāstīs tālāk par ENEC, ENEC+, kā tas radies, ko tas īsti nozīmē, kāpēc viņš Eiropā ir, cik sen ir, un tālāk, ko nozīmē vispār testēšana, ieskats no laboratorijas puses. Tad, Jacob, I introduced you a little bit. We will have parallel translation in Latvian. So you speak and he translates.
Okay.
You will work in team, so everybody can understand, visi var saprast. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to speak to you about certification in general and about ENEC and ENEC+, and a little bit more on how to make sure that your products that you are using are safe.
Pirmkārt, paldies par uzaicinājumu, paldies, ka esmu šeit, varu jums pastāstīt par certifikāciju kopumā, par ENEC un arī ENEC+, un kā pārliecināties, ka iekārtas, ko izmantosim, vai arī, ka certifikācija nozīmē drošību.
So first of all, let me shortly introduce DECRA to you. I'm not sure if everybody knows DECRA, but we are a worldwide organization. We have about 45,000 people currently employed all over the world. We have many offices in many countries. We have quite a lot of laboratories. One of the main laboratories is in the Netherlands, and that's where I'm stationed. And there we have a lighting technology center. We also have specialized lighting technology centers in Dresden in Germany, in Italy. Then we have 3 also in China, which is in Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Wenzhou, I believe. However, I'm not too much involved in the Chinese part. I only work in the Netherlands. We do quite a lot. As I said, 45,000 people. They not all do lighting. They do all kinds of certifications. DECRA started in the automotive industry in Germany, and in the Netherlands there was a company called KIMA, and KIMA did all the electrotechnical certification for the Netherlands. About 2007-2008, DECRA bought KIMA, and since that time DECRA was also involved in electrotechnical certification.
Jā, tātad DECRA tā ir liela kompānija ar 45,000 nodarbinātu cilvēku aptuveni, un mums ir biroji dažādās valstīs, tieši tāpat kā laboratorijas, un viena no tām ir Nīderlandē, kurā strādāju arī es. Mums ir arī apgaismas tehnoloģiju centrs, tas ir specializēts, un tādi iespējams arī ir vairāki. Tātad ir Dresdenē, ir Itālijā, 3 no tiem Ķīnā, Šanhajā, Guangzhou un vēl vienā pilsētā, bet, protams, kā ne visi strādā ar apgaismojumu, iespējams Ķīnā, un es arī tik daudz par Ķīnu tieši nezināšu, bet tātad strādāju konkrēti Nīderlandē. Tas ir ļoti daudz, 45,000 darbinieku nodarbojas ar certifikāciju dažādākajās jomās, ne tikai apgaismojuma ziņā. Un kā tas viss sākās? Bija tāds uzņēmums KIMA vai KEMA Nīderlandē, un tas nodarbojas ar elektrotehnisko certifikāciju, un tad DECRA to arī iegādājās.
So DECRA is working in 8 major business lines: vehicle inspection, and that's basically from the history, claims and expertise, product testing, which is the business line that I'm working in, industrial inspection, consulting, auditing, training, and temp work. And temp work is mainly only done in Germany, and that's basically consultancy for the car manufacturers.
Un tajā arī slaidā redzams ir 8 galvenie DECRA darbības virzieni. Tās ir automašīnu inspekcijas, ekspertīzes, produktu testēšanu. Produktu testēšanā strādāju arī es, industriālās inspekcijas, audits, apmācības un temp darbs, kas vairāk ir konsultācijas.
A little bit about me. Who am I? I'm Jacob Nueskin. I work for DECRA certification. I'm an operational manager for the company. I've held many positions, but I've been working in the lighting industry for, I think, almost 35 years. Worked for several companies, DECRA, Kima, Kinzo, Shell. I am a lean black belt. Published several books. And all of them were on lighting. Most are in Dutch, sorry. But mainly helping the industry to transition from conventional lighting to LED lighting.
Un nedaudz arī par mani. Esmu Jacobs Nueskins un es esmu operacionālais vadītājs DECRA certifikācijā. Vairāk nekā vai gandrīz 35 gadus strādāju jau apgaismojuma jomā, arī slaidā redzams kādās kompānijās Kema, Kinzo un DECRA. Un esmu arī ar melno jostu Lean darbībā. Esmu izdevis grāmatas, diemžēl holandiešu valodā, bet tās lielākoties ir par to, kā pāriet no konvencionālā apgaismojuma uz LED apgaismojumu.
So today we will go to an agenda of 3 points. First, I want to talk you through what is certification and how does that work. 2, on how can you use that in procurement. And 3, the quality parameters to consider.
Un tā ir arī šodienas darba kārtība. Certifikācija, kas tā ir, kā tā strādā. Otrkārt, pielietojums iepirkumos, kā to izmantot certifikāciju. Un treškārt, kvalitātes parametri, kas ir jāņem vērā.
So looking at certification, certification is to certify, is to declare that specific requirements are met.
Certifikācija no slaida, tā ir definīcija. Tas nozīmē apliecināt vai certificēt, paziņot, ka noteiktas prasības tiek ievērotas.
So let's analyze that a little bit further. So what is a certificate? It's a written declaration, and in a certificate we declare that specific requirements are met. A certificate is the result of certification, so it's just a document. And to certify something, you have to have a process, a certification process. And that needs to be followed, of course.
Un padziļinātāk ieskatoties certifikācijas definīcijā, ir tā, ka certifikāts attiecīgi ir pierakstīta vai rakstveida šāda deklarācija. Certifikātā mēs deklarējam, ka tiek ievērotas specifiskas prasības, noteiktas prasības. Un certifikāts līdz ar to ir certifikācijas rezultāts. Certifikācija kā tāda ir process, kas attiecīgi arī ir jāievēro.
So a certification process will cover basically 2 major points: evaluation according to requirements and a declaration. So the declaration is finally the certificate. And those requirements are generally laid down in a certification scheme. So it's a set of rules that we call a certification scheme.
Un līdz ar to, kas tad ir certifikācijas process? Certifikācijas process aptver novērtējumu atbilstoši noteiktajām prasībām. Pirmais un otrais jau deklarācija. Šādas prasības ir ietvertas certifikācijas schēmā. Certifikācijas schēma ir noteikumu kopums.
A certification scheme contains the rules, procedures, regulations for conformity assessment against a standard.
Un savukārt certifikācijas schēma, jeb noteikumi, sastāv attiecīgi no noteikumiem, procedūrām un regulējumiem, kuriem nepieciešams atbilst, novērtējot tos pret standartiem.
So what is a standard? A standard is a document with agreement specifications and criteria about a product, a service or a method. A standard can be issued by a standards organization like ISO or IEC or EN, or a standard can be issued by a consortium like ZAGA, DALI, and many others, but can also be issued by an organization. So a company, a lighting producer who has their own internal standards. So there are many ways to define a standard and to have a standard.
Normas jeb standarti ir dokuments, kurā ir vienošanās, specifikācijas un kritēriji par produktu, pakalpojumu vai metodi. Un šos standartus var izdot gan kompānijas, gan organizācijas, gan arī organizāciju konsorcijas, kā piemēram organizācijas būtu ISO, EN, SENEBEK vai organizāciju konsorcijas, SAGA, DALI un citi. Arī kompānijas pašas var izdot šādu standartu par saviem iekšējiem standartiem.
Yeah, so the standard also contains the rules to which a test house must comply to be able to give certification. A standard gives you also methods to test a product. So the standard explains exactly what to test and how to test.
Standarts nozīmē arī testēšanas procedūras, kuras būtu jāievēro tad organizācijai vai laboratorijai, kura izmēģinās to atbilstoši konkrētām prasībām.
A standard can specifically issue or be about procedures like an ISO quality system certification, ISO 9000 kind of certification. But it can also be a product certification like the EN 6598 series, which is applicable to lighting, so which contains the safety requirements for lighting.
Un, protams, kā tas var ietvert, šie standarti var ietvert gan procedūras, piemēram, kā ISO 9000, vai arī produkta, kā piemēram attiecībā uz apgaismojumu, tas būtu EN 6598, kas attiecas uz produkta drošību.
Every certification you can divide into specific certification types. And just to give you an understanding about the certification types, I want to walk this through with you. These certification types are standardized by ISO 17065, and that's the standard for certification.
Un arī certifikācijai to var iedalīt dažādos certifikāciju tipos. Mēs tos arī apskatīsim, un tie arī ir noteikti ISO 17065 standarta.
So if you look at certification type, you have basically two things to consider. One is the testing of the product, and second is surveillance. How will you make sure that the products are always the same? The market surveillance.
Un te ir jāņem vērā divas lietas. Testēšana, kā notiks tā un kas tieši jāveic attiecīgajos testos, un otrkārt tā novērošana, kā novērot produktu un pateikt tā, jeb noteikt tā atbilstību certifikātam standartam.
So if you look at the left column, you see here sampling, confirm, compliance, review, certification decision, and licensing, which means in sampling we need to take samples from the product or from production or whatever, but there needs to be a sample. We need to test it to confirm the compliance with the standard. There's a review process, so it's not only one person who does testing, but you need another one who looks at were the tests done correctly and were the right procedures used. Then there's a certification decision, which is basically, again, somebody who is looking if all those procedures were executed correctly and if the result is positive. And there could be licensing. Licensing is not always the case, but licensing, in the case of a certification mark, you need a license.
Un, attiecīgi, kreisajā pusē mēs redzam kolonā, kā tas notiek. Ir tātad paraugu ņemšana, jeb paraugu testēšana, lai tie atbilstu noteiktajiem standartiem. Vai tie būtu produktu paraugi vai ražošanas paraugi, tie tiek testēti. Un pēc testēšanas vēl arī notiek šo produktu apskats kas arī vēl pārbauda to, vai attiecīgie testi ir veikti atbilstoši procedūrām. Lēmumu pieņemšana par certifikāciju tieši tāpat apskata, vai visas procedūras šajā procesā ir tikušas ievērotas. Licencēšana nevienmēr notiek, taču certifikācijas zīmju gadījumā tā notiek.
So if you look at the bottom of the table, you see the surveillance points, and you see from open market. So what does that mean? You take samples from the open market. You can take them from a shop. It can be from production, so you can take the samples at the end of the production line. Then you have the option that the manufacturer has to have a quality system in place with random sampling. And the final one is the inspection and evaluation of the production itself.
Un tad otrā sadaļa, kreisajā pusē, tieši tāpat kolonā, ir šī novērošana. Kā mēs redzam arī slaidā tabulā, tad tas būtu no brīvā tirgus. Tas nozīmē, ka šo produktu var paņemt no veikala, bet var arī paņemt no ražošanas. Varbūt, ka ražotājiem ir arī kvalitātes sistēma izveidota, lai no ražošanas procesa tas pats veiktu šo paraugu ņemšanu un kvalitātes noteikšanu. Un visbeidzot ir arī inspekcija un šīs ražošanas novērtēšana.
So if you look at these types of certifications, 1A and Type 5 are the main used certifications. 1A is a one-shot, that's a CB procedure, for example. And CB, I will explain a little bit further on what CB is, but it's basically a test. You get a report and a certificate, but you cannot use a certification mark. It's just a one-shot, so there's no surveillance.
Un arī ir attēloti tipi. Populārākie no tiem būs 1A un 5. Šobrīd par 1A, tas ir piemēram CB procedūra, tiek veikti testi, tad tiek sagatavoti ziņojumi un arī certifikācija, bet ne certifikācijas zīme.
So then you have ISO Type 5, the other one which is very often used, for example, ENEC certification or ENEC Plus certification, which is an ISO Type 5. So you have not only the type test, but you can also use a certification mark on the product, and the production is surveyed. So that means that in ENEC certification, products will be taken from the factory, will be tested again to see if it's still compliant and if it's still the same as the product that was originally tested. So you have a very high level of assurance that the product is still the same as the one that was tested in the initial type testing phase.
Un ISO tipa 5 certifikācija, piemēram, tāda ir ENEC vai ENEC Plus certifikācija. Tas ir tieši tāpat tests, vai tāda certifikācija ar testiem, kura rezultātā certifikāta zīmi ir iespējams izmantot, tiek novērota arī ražošana vēlākā posmā. Tātad iestājas arī šis novērošanas posms. Tas ir nepieciešams tāpēc, lai pēc tam novērošanas posmā noteiktu, vai produkts vēl joprojām atbilst sākotnēji testētajam produktam. Tas ir ļoti augsts drošības līmenis.
So looking at approval marks, I think this is something that can be recognized by all of you. There are many kinds of approval marks, certification marks, and what do they all mean? That's one of the major problems that are there in certification.
Apliecinājumu un novērtējumu zīmes vai certifikācijas zīmes jūs noteikti arī pazīstat kādas no parādītajām un arī zināt, ko tās nozīmē.
And the big problem is, if you have a certification mark, what does it actually mean? What is the content of the certification mark? What kind of certification mark are you dealing with?
Un vēl ir problēma tajā, ka ko šī certifikācijas zīme pati par sevi nozīmē, ar kādu veidu certifikācijas zīmi jūs strādājat un kādas ir pret to izvirzītās prasības?
At the end of the 1980s, so that's already a long time ago, the world was changing and manufacturers, they were selling all over Europe. They started to sell more and more outside of their own local market, out of their own local country. So to give you an idea, we had customers, we had the KEMA-KEUR approval mark, and this mark was obligatory till 1970. And then it was no longer obligatory, but everybody put the approval mark on their products, otherwise they would not sell it in the Netherlands, for example. But manufacturers didn't only want to sell in the Netherlands, they also wanted to sell in Belgium, so you had to put another approval mark. Then they also wanted to sell in Germany, you needed another one. Then they wanted to sell in Austria, another one, etc., etc., etc. And then the initiative came that the manufacturer said, okay, we need to stop this madness because it doesn't fit to the rating label anymore. There are too many approval marks, so we need one for the whole of Europe.
Un līdz ar to tad arī nedaudz vēsturē 80. gadu beigās, kas jau ir pirms ilga laika, ražotāji pārdeva savas preces, produktus visā Eiropā. Protams, ka viņi vēlējās pārdot ārpus savas valsts, bet arī klientiem citur. Un, piemēram, līdz 1970. gadam bija spēkā tāda KEMA-KEUR Nīderlandē zīme, un tad to atcēla. Bet, attiecīgi, tik un tā atbildot konkrētām prasībām, un to ar šādu te zīmi varēja pārdot Nīderlandē, taču ražotājs vēlējās pārdot arī Beļģijā, tam bija nepieciešama vēl viena certifikācijas zīme, tad vēlējās arī Vācijā, attiecīgi vēl viena, un tad arī Austrijā, un vēl ražotāji nāca klajā ar iniciatīvu par to, ka to zīmju ir pārāk daudz un bija jāvienojas par vienas konkrētas certifikācijas zīmi visā Eiropā.
So basically that was that needed to change, and then the ENEC mark was basically born. So the ENEC mark was then founded by all the test houses that were at that time in Europe active. And they are united. At that time that was a different name, but now that organization is called ETHICS, and they basically designed this new certification scheme called ENEC.
Un tieši tā arī radās ENEC certifikācijas schēma. Tā būtībā bija visu Eiropas testēšanas laboratoriju vai centru apvienošanās, un viņi apvienojās tolaik pēc cita nosaukuma, šobrīd to sauc par ETHICS, un tā viņi izveidoja ENEC kopējo schēmu.
So, what is a certification mark? Let's go a little bit more into detail. A certification mark is a compact visual quality appraisal on a product or service issued by a reliable source. That's an approval mark.
Un kas tad ir certifikācijas zīme? Certifikācijas zīme ir kompakta vizuāla kvalitātes apliecinājums produktam vai pakalpojumam, ko izdod attiecīgi uzticams avots.
So, compact and visual, let's have a look at some certification marks.
Kompakts, vizuāls, kā tika minēts definīcijā, paskatīsimies uz to, kā tās izskatās.
I put several on there, and if you look at them, it's all ENEC, it's a compact, VDE, CE, ENEC Plus, C-DECRA US, DECRA mark, LED Performance mark, GS mark, Semco mark. There are many, many more. I just mentioned, of course, the most from DECRA, but there are many other certification marks as well, like Semco and VDE, who are our main competitors. The ENEC mark can be issued by many certification organizations, like, for example, VDE can issue the ENEC mark, DECRA can issue it, but also Semco. But of course, the local certification marks, like the VDE mark, can only be issued by VDE, cannot be issued by DECRA, for example.
Un, attiecīgi, šeit ir diezgan saprotams, tika nosauktas visas šīs zīmes, un tās ir tās, ko izsniedz arī pati DECRA. Taču ir arī skaidrojums par to, ka ENEC zīmi nevar visas organizācijas izdot, bet, piemēram, Semco, kas arī ir konkurenti, tie var.
Yeah, so let's look at the certification marker again. So quality appraisal. So what are we talking about then?
Šis ir kvalitātes novērtējums. Ko tas nozīmē, runājot par certifikācijas zīmi?
So what is quality? Quality is the level on which a product or service conforms to the requirements resulting from the intended use case.
Kas ir kvalitāte? Šāda definīcija tiek piedāvāta. Kvalitāte ir līmenis, kādā produkts vai pakalpojums atbilst prasībām, kuras izriet no paredzētā izmantošanas piemēra.
So quality is basically a very difficult subject, I would say, because quality for one person is not the same as quality for the other person. Now I will give you an example.
Un tas nozīmē, ka kvalitāte ir tāds grūts temats vai drīzāk subjektīvs. Vienam cilvēkam tas var nozīmēt kaut ko citu nekā citam, bet es ar piemēriem paskaidrošu.
So let's look at a lighting product that is used in your home. In your home, your lights are on for approximately 1,000 hours per year, a little bit more maybe, or a little bit less, depending on where you use it. We can even make details on that. On your toilet, you probably use your lighting just a few hours a year, a little bit more. And in your living room, it's on every night and approximately 3 hours a day.
Un tad paskatīsimies uz konkrētu piemēru apgaismojuma produkti jūsu mājās. Tie vidēji iespējams tātad plus mīnus, bet tiek vai arī tātad strādā 1000 stundu gadā. Un tiek minēts, piemēram, toaletē, varbūt tikai dažas stundas gadā, labi vairāk, un varbūt dzīvojamā istabā tās ir vairākas stundas dienā.
So if you think about that, so you have your lights in your living room, 1,000 hours a year. And then you have your lights where we are all here, public lighting on the street, which will be used, how many was it? Approximately 4,000 hours per year. Which much higher intensity.
Un līdz ar to parunāsim par šo salīdzinājumu ar intensitātēm. Arī jūsu dzīvojamajā istabā, ja apgaismojums strādā 1000 stundu gadā, bet ir, piemēram, publisko telpu apgaismojums vai apgaismojums uz ielām, tās būs varbūt 4000 stundu gadā.
Cost is also much different. A light bulb you buy in the shop, it's a few euros. A luminaire for the streets is much more expensive. But looking at that, you put a luminaire up on the street, you don't want to exchange it every year because that's too difficult, too costly. A light bulb in your house you can switch every year. It's easy, you just take it off and put a new one in.
Tam ir arī atšķirīgas izmaksas. Mēs, piemēram, skatāmies, ka veikalā varam nopirkt spuldzi un vienkārši to nomainīt. Uz ielas šādas izmaksas būtu daudz dārgākas. Mēs, uzstādot gaismas elementu, nevēlamies katru gadu iespējams veikt tā apkopi vai mainīt tā elementu, bet mājās savukārt mēs varam pavisam viegli nomainīt spuldzi.
Looking at an average light source you buy for your home, it's 10-20,000 hours of usage, which is approximately 20 years. Looking at street lighting, most municipalities, as far as I know, they really require at least 20 years of operation, which is 100,000 hours that you need to reach in that case. So what we see in tenders is for public lighting, lifetime should be at least 100,000 hours with an L90, so that the light level remains at 90% at the end of the lifetime.
Un, attiecīgi, ja mēs iegādājamies apgaismojumu produktu mājām, mums tas kalpos 20,000 stundu, kas atbilst aptuveni 20 gadiem. Pašvaldības iepirkumos lielākoties prasība arī ir, lai darbotos apgaismojums 20 gadus. Kas nozīmē, ka šim elementam ir jāsasniedz dzīves ilgums 100,000 stundu un arī iepirkuma procedūrās ar norādi L90%, kas nozīmē, ka tā dzīves beigās ir jābūt 90%.
So comparing those two, looking at the light source you use in your home, let's say 20,000 hours, so 20 years. comparing that with the light source you want to use in public space, last 4, maybe 5 years, and then you need to exchange it. So for the one, for your home, very good quality because it will last for 20 years. For public lighting, not so sure.
Un, attiecīgi, arī kvalitāte pati par sevi. Tas, ko jūs iegādāsieties mājās, lai tas nostrādā 20,000 stundu, piemēram, vai nu slēdzim, vai nu kādam citam elementam, tas nostrādās un tā būs bez problēmām. Bet vai tiešām tas pats būs arī publiskā apgaismojuma gadījumā, diez vai.
And also thinking about the light level for your home, it's generally good to have a 70% at the end of the lifetime, 70-80%. In public lighting, if you only have 70%, you need to start at a very high level at the beginning and you spend too much energy. So you really need to do some additional work to make sure that energy is not lost. You have solutions for that, but let's not go into that. But there are many things that are important, and quality is therefore not so easy to define, because quality for public lighting or quality for your home lighting, it can be completely different.
Un līdz ar to arī runa ir par līmeni. Piemēram, produktā, ko iegādājamies savām mājām dzīves ilguma beigās, viņa līmenis vai apgaismojuma līmenis ir 70-80%, kas ir ļoti labi, bet attiecīgi publiskā apgaismojuma gadījumā 70%, tas nozīmē, ka mums būtu jāsāk ar ārkārtīgi augstu līmeni pašā sākumā. Bet mēs neiedziļināsimies šajā tematā, tur ir ļoti daudz svarīgu lietu, kas ir jāņem vērā. Vienkārši tiek norādīts uz lielo atšķirību starp kvalitātes prasībām publiskajā un mājas apgaismojumā.
So then to complicate things a little bit, looking back at those certification marks again, you see the ENEC mark. The qualitative factor that this ENEC mark is covering is electrical safety. That's the same for VDE. CE covers a little bit more, but I will explain later what the differences are. ENEC Plus is on the initial performance of the products. Looking at the S, it's again electrical safety. GS is also electrical safety. Then we have the LED performance mark. It's about energy efficiency, lifetime, and light performance. Then we have the CDECRA US. It's also a safety mark, but that's mainly for the North American market, the US and Canada, which have completely different standards than we in Europe for safety. And then you still have the DECRA mark, which is again only covering electrical safety.
Atgriezīsimies vēlreiz pie šīm certifikācijas zīmēm. Visas nosauktās patiesībā tātad ir par elektrisko vai elektrības drošību, un tad tiek nosaukts, ka tās ir ENEC, DV, protams, CE. ENEC plus vairāk runa ir par sākotnējo veiktspēju, tad arī apakšējā rindā viss ir attiecībā uz drošību un norāda tikai uz to, ka DECRA atsevišķi vēl ir kvalitātes certifikācijas zīmes tieši paredzētas ASV.
Okay, so looking at the next point then is the reliable source. It has to come from that reliable source. And the reliable... Sorry.
Nākamais punkts bija par to, ka šai certifikācijai ir jānāk no uzticama avota. Un kas tad ir šis uzticamais avots?
So a reliable source is a source that provides data based on truth. Transparency and independent are the key words in there. And reliability is normally proven by means of accreditation.
Un ko tas nozīmē tieši tāpat ir arī uzrakstīts slaidā, ka uzticams avots ir avots, kas nodrošina datus, balstoties uz patiesību vai iespējams faktiem domāts, un atslēgvārdi šeit ir caurspīdīgums un neatkarība. Un attiecīgi arī uzticamību pierāda arī ar akreditācijas palīdzību.
So what is accreditation? Accreditation is quite simple. It's giving trust. That's the only thing that accreditation does.
Un kas ir akreditācija savukārt? Akreditācija vienkārši nozīmē dot šo te uzticību, uzticēšanos.
And for the accreditation, to give an accreditation, every country has its own accreditation council. In the Netherlands, it's the Dutch Council for Accreditation. Here in Latvia, it's Latea, I believe, was the right name. Yeah, and this organization is basically an organization that will check laboratories, they will hire in experts, they will check the processes, they will see if you are completely independent, not depending on one customer or only have one client or locked into a client, and so that you can give an independent and transparent value or let's say declaration on the product, so that it's independently tested.
Un savukārt šīs te akreditācijas padomes tādas eksistē visās valstīs, tika nosaukts, ka, protams, tāda ir Nīderlandē, arī Latvijā, iespējams ar nosaukumu Latea. Tas ir organizācijas, kas tieši tāpat pārbauda procesus, pieaicina ekspertus, pārbauda, vai nav, piemēram, pārāk liela paļaušanās uz kādu vienu klientu vai konkrētām procedūrām. Visā šajā ieskatās un pārbauda, vai tā ir neatkarīga šādas te akreditācijas piešķiršana.
All those organizations in general are also a member of IEEI, and IEEI is an international organization that basically then again levels the requirements, etc., between all those accreditation organizations to make sure that when the RVA in the Netherlands gives out an accreditation, it has the exact same content and the exact same meaning when, for example, Latea gives out this accreditation.
Un šādas akreditācijas organizācijas savukārt visas ir arī tās piedalās vai ir biedri organizācijā IEEI, visas pasaules organizācijā, kas tieši tāpat var izlīdzināt konkrētas prasības visām, lai, piemēram, RVA izdotā Nīderlandē akreditācija nozīmētu pēc savas būtības to pašu, ko Latea.
Going back to the certification marks again, and then we have another look. We have the ENEC mark, which is an accredited approval mark, VDE, DECRA GS, SEMCO, LED Performance, CDECRA US, DECRA, and ENEC Plus. They are all coming from accredited organizations. The only difference is the ENEC marking, so that's why we do not call it a certification mark, but we call it a marking. The CE marking is a self-declaration by the manufacturer. And the manufacturer has to put it on his equipment, and he has to make sure that he complies with the European legislation, but he has to declare that himself.
Atkal atgriežamies slaidā, ir norādīts certifikācijas zīmes. Tās visas ir arī akreditētas certifikācijas zīmes, un nosaukt arī ir to nosaukumi. Vienīgā atšķirība bija ENEC Plus un CE, kas ir pašdeklarēšanās zīme, kur ražotājs norāda atbilstību arī Eiropas likumiem.
Yeah, so looking at those certification schemes, I'll just have put them on paper, and I think this presentation can be handed out to everybody later on. Yeah, so everybody can just look it up. But I will go through it quite quickly, I would say. First of all, the CB certification scheme is used quite a lot, but it's ISO Type 1A certification scheme. And it was mainly intended, and it's also used for that, to exchange results between laboratories. So let's say DECRA does a test on a product, we issue a CB certificate and report, and then it goes to another laboratory that the manufacturer wants a certification mark from. He simply has to hand in the report, and that manufacturer will then accept those results and issue their certification mark.
Te būs tātad ātri iespējams pārēja pār šīm certifikācijas schēmām. Tā to ir daudz, un sāksim tātad ar CB certifikācijas schēmu. Tā ir ISO 1A tīpa certifikācija, kas lielākoties paredzēta apmaiņai ar šiem certifikācijas rezultātiem starp laboratorijām. Piemēram, DECRA izdod CB certifikātu, ražotājs vēlas saņemt arī no citas organizācijas un izveidot ziņojumu, kuru vēlāk tad arī pieņem attiecīgi cita laboratorija.
We also see a lot of additional use of the CB certification scheme, and that is to prove that you comply with certain European legislation, low voltage directive mainly, but also in proof to municipalities or other stakeholders that the product is compliant.
CB certifikātu izmanto arī vēl plašāk, lielākoties, lai pierādītu atbilstību Eiropas valstu noteiktiem likumiem, bet arī pašvaldības to izmanto atbilstības noteikšanai.
Looking at ENEC certification scheme, that is owned by ETEX, as I explained before, and to issue a ENEC certificate, you have to be in ENEC test lab. There are quite a lot, I think about 23, 24 at the moment, or 25 even. And the certificate that comes out is an ENEC certificate, and that is an ISO Type 5 certification scheme.
Apkopojums par ENEC certifikācijas schēmu, tās īpašnieks, kā iepriekš minēts, ir organizācijā ETICS, tiek izdota, ir nepieciešama laboratorija, speciāla ENEC testēšanas laboratorija, kādu iespējams jau ir 25 rezultātā, tiek izdots ENEC certifikāts, un tā ir ISO tipa 5 certifikācijas schēma.
ENEC is only for electrotechnical products, and it contains basically the low voltage directive, so it's based on electrotechnical safety.
Šī ENEC certifikācijas schēma ir tikai paredzēta elektrotehniskajiem produktiem un apliecinot to, low voltage?
Low voltage directive.
Zemesprieguma direktīva? Jā, tā to apliecina, jā. Thank you.
Comparing that with the ENEC Plus certification scheme, the same owner, it's also about electrotechnical products, but it is not on electrical safety. This is based on initial performance of the product.
Un ENEC Plus savukārt arī attiecas uz elektrotehniskajiem produktiem, un savukārt tā vairs nav par drošību kā ENEC, bet gan sākotnējo veiktspēju apliecina produktam.
So DECRA mark, I won't go into much detail here, but it's comparable to ENEC, but that's owner of DECRA, and only DECRA can issue a DECRA mark.
Savukārt DECRA zīme, par ko nerunāšu vairs varbūt tik detalizēti, bet tās īpašnieks ir DECRA, tikai DECRA to attiecīgi tad var arī izdot.
Okay, so how do you evaluate a certificate? The important thing, or how do you value a certificate, I would say, maybe that's better. First look at the content. What are the use standards, rules and requirements? And is it covering the quality issue that you want to have checked? That's the first important thing. Second important thing is the reliability. So if you have a certificate, you have to check and you have to determine for yourself, is this the reliability that I want? Self-declaration, third-party testing, or accredited third-party testing. And finally, the certification process. Is it a one-shot, or is it the ISO Type 5, for example, where there's market surveillance in place as well?
Un kā novērtēt certifikātu? Attiecīgi slaidā tiek dota arī atbilde. Vai tas būtu saturs, kuru mēs novērtējam? Mēs paši novērtējam, kādi ir izmantotie tajā standarti, noteikumi un prasības. Tieši tāpat mēs nosakām arī kvalitāti, ko tieši vai arī kādu kvalitāti noteiktiem parametriem mēs vēlamies redzēt. Par uzticamību, vai tā ir pašdeklarēšanas, vai tas ir pašdeklarēšanas certifikāts, vai tajā ir arī trešo pušu testēšana, vai arī akreditēto trešo pušu testēšana. Tieši tāpat pats certifikācijas process ir svarīgs. Tas bija attiecībā uz šo tipu, vai tas ir 1A vai 1 saskares punkta tips, vai arī kurš attiecīgais ISO tips tas ir.
So I'll give you a few examples and explain a little bit what it means. In this case, for example, the ENEC mark, the requirements are the European standards for electrical safety. So it's based on the low voltage directive, and the standards are the EN 6598. But the main thing is important to understand that it's based on the low voltage directive. The reliability is accreditation, so it's an accredited certification mark. You have quite a lot of confidence. You can have a lot of confidence in this. And the process is ISO type 5, which means that there's also market surveillance implemented and production control.
Pirmais piemērs ir tātad ENEC, kādas ir pret to izvirzītās prasības. Tie ir Eiropas elektrības drošības vai elektriskās drošības standarti. Uzsvars uz to, ka tā atbilst zemesprieguma direktīvai, nosauktā arī EN 6598. Otrkārt, uzticamība. Tā ir akreditēta certifikācijas zīme, kas nozīmē, ka jūs varat būt ļoti pārliecināti par to. Un attiecīgais process, kas tiek piemērots, ir ISO 5. tipa, kas nozīmē, ka notiek arī tirgus uzraudzība vēlāk.
Second example is the ENEC Plus marking, which is an addition on the ENEC marking. So you can never have an ENEC Plus marking without the ENEC marking. That's important to understand. The requirements are a little bit different because this is not about electrical safety, but about the initial performance. So the initial performance, with that we mean, for example, is the lumen output actually correct? Is the color temperature correct? Is the CRI correct? Etc. So the manufacturer declares color temperature 4000 Kelvin. ENEC Plus simply checks, is it really 4000 Kelvin? Yes. Okay, that's correct. The reliability is again exactly the same as ENEC, accreditation, and the process is also ISO type 5.
ENEC Plus ir otrais piemērs, taču tas vairs nav par elektrisko drošību. Tomēr ir jāpiemina to, ka ENEC Plus nevar būt vai nevar tikt piešķirts bez ENEC, bet tas tātad nav par drošību, bet par sākotnējo produkta veiktspēju. Tas ir pieteiktais ražotāja spilgtums, CRI un gaismas temperatūra. Ražotājs nosaka, ka tie ir 4000 Kelvin, piemēram, certifikāts to attiecīgi arī apliecina. Uzticamība atkal tā ir akreditēts certifikāts un tajā piemērotais process ir ISO 5. tipa.
Final example I wanted to show is the CE marking. As I said before, it's not a certification mark. And that you will see really quickly. Requirements are European legislation, so it needs to be there. You need to comply with it. There's no doubt about that. The reliability is not so high because it's self-declaration, and that's what we see also in practice, that many products are CE marked but are not compliant. And the process is basically an ISO type 1A plus an addition. So what do I mean with that? The manufacturer has to take samples, has to make his own testing and certification, and at the end he issues a CE declaration and he has to put CE on his product. And then the European legislation basically says the manufacturer needs to confirm that his products that he's producing and putting on the market are still the same as the one he tested. So basically what he documented.
Savukārt trešais piemērs ir CE. Nav klasiskā izpratnē certifikācijas zīme, jo to principā regulē, nosaka tā nepieciešamību Eiropas likumi. Tas nozīmē, ka tam uzticamība nav tik augsta. Pats ražotājs piesaka to, ka viņam šis CE certifikāts ir, un to mēs arī redzam praksē. Process ir tikai 1A tipa ISO un ar papildu. Šis te papildu nozīmē to, ka ražotājs pats ņem paraugus, testē tos un certificē, un tad apzīmē produktu ar CE marķējumu, kas patiesībā nozīmē to, ka pats certifikāts pasaka, ka ražotājs ir apliecinājis, ka produkts ir tieši tāds pats, kādu testēja.
Putting them in a row, comparing them to each other. So CE self-declaration, ENEC and ENEC Plus are independent testing. CE is based on legislation. ENEC and ENEC Plus are safety and initial performance. And surveillance, in the end, for CE is by the authorities. And for ENEC and ENEC Plus, that is a stringent market surveillance that is organized by the test houses.
Salīdzinājums un kopsavilkums, visas trīs zīmes, viena otrai blakus. Kā redzam, CE ir pašdeklarācija, ENEC un ENEC Plus ir ar neatkarīgu testēšanu, kas ir akreditēta. CE ir balstīts uz likumu ievērošanu, savukārt ENEC Plus ir par drošību un sākotnējo veiktspēju. CE certifikātu uzrauga valstu iestādes, bet ENEC un ENEC Plus gadījumā tā ir stingra novērošana tirgus apstākļos.
Any questions so far?
Varbūt ir jautājumi šobrīd.
Can you please tell a bit more about these procedures for market surveillance? What do you do and how frequently you do?
So for the manufacturer, every year the factory is inspected. So an inspector goes to the factory and they will check if all the production processes, etc., are still in conformity with the standard. So we have a special inspection standard they need to comply with. So it's more like ISO 9000 quality system standard. During that inspection, products are taken from stock or from the production line, and those are sent to the test houses. And in the test house, we then check the product if it's still compliant, so it's still the same as the original tested products. That's one thing. The other thing is that the manufacturer has to show during the inspection compliance that he has implemented checks of production control. And that is checked, of course, on paper, because he cannot check everything, but it's checked on paper to see if he does that. And the manufacturer has to supply so-called PVT reports, production verification testing, and that he needs to do himself or needs to subcontract, and most manufacturers subcontract those tests because they cannot execute it themselves. So there's quite a lot of checking that's done, and that's done every year. So every year this whole process needs to be gone through, and it depends a little bit on the manufacturer on how many products are checked. So it depends on the number of product groups. So let's say manufacturer has only street lighting, then it's probably only 1 or 2 products that are checked in a year. But if the manufacturer also produces office lighting or then more products will be checked. Does that answer your question?
Almost.
Almost.
Another, to be more precise. So basically, you meant this checking is once a year, so it means that the certificate would be only valid maximum for 1 year. Is it true or?
No, certificate is as long as it is published, so you can check that on the website. I will get to that later. You can check if the certificate is still published, and the manufacturer is obliged to keep the product the same. He has to mention or he has to request a renewal of the certificate if he changes anything. So that means that as long as he keeps the products the same, as long as we are able to test and check every year, then the certificate remains valid until the standard changes. If the standard changes, the certificate also becomes invalid because then he needs to update or upgrade to the new standard. That is for ENEC. Looking at CB certification, that's a completely different story, because in the case of CB certification, we do this testing, he gets a certificate, but there's no surveillance, so there's no checking. So in that case of a CB certificate, the standard rule is that it remains valid for 3 years. Basically, it remains valid forever, but the standard rule is that between test houses, it is agreed that after 3 years, the chance of the manufacturer having changed the product becomes so high that additional checking is needed. In ENEC, that's not needed because the product is checked every year, so we keep our files up to date, and the manufacturer has to apply for changes when he makes a change.
Another question, you mentioned that ENEC and ENEC Plus are published somewhere.
Yeah.
For example, I'm familiar with JAGA database,
Yeah.
publicly accessible, but I'm not familiar with ENEC and ENEC Plus database.
They are also publicly available, but I will show you later on. Yeah,
Okay.
right.
And
Correct.
another question.
Yeah.
Last one from me. about performance, ENEC plus performance, doesn't it somehow limit the possibility to improve product?
No,
For
you can do.
example, from LED chips are developing, getting better and better.
But ENEC performance doesn't set minimum requirements. ENEC performance only confirms what the manufacturer is saying. So if you improve your product, it will simply confirm that it's better. But it will not say you need, for example, the efficacy needs to be 100 lumens per watt, 110 lumens per watt, 200 lumens per watt. It doesn't really matter. ENEC Plus only confirms what the manufacturer is saying. So if the manufacturer says it's 150 lumens per watt, the efficacy needs to be 150 lumens per watt. So it doesn't limit the innovation. It simply confirms what the manufacturer is saying.
Sorry, vice versa. It doesn't confirm this new upgrade, for example. If the certificate declares 150 lumens per watt, there we don't have this independent approval of the new edition of the product. So this remains somehow a bit gray zone.
No, because the manufacturer cannot change the product. So as soon as he changes the product, he needs to apply, and then we will confirm the new specification.
For example, once a year.
Whatever how often he wants to update. Some manufacturers update every half a year. Some manufacturers keep the product the same for many years. So it depends a little bit on how they are developing. I have customers that change their products maybe every 2-3 years because they have a very stable customer base. Other manufacturers change their product every half year, some even faster. Depends on what their customers are. I have one customer that changes quite a lot, simply because he wants to apply for tenders and he needs to change every time and time again. So he updates his certificates quite often because he has another feature added or just a new power range that he wants to add, all that kind of things that happen. Yeah.
Nu, respektīvi, I will add something. So, tas nozīmē to, ka, ja ražotājs tagad ir ielicis efektīvāku diodi, teiksim, 165 watt, 150, viņš nekur netiks to izmantot. Jo tikko tendrī ielicis, kā man ir 165, un tas rāda tikai taisnība, bet ENEC certifikāts ar paskatījums origīgi tev 150, es jaunu uztaisījis, visu ir ārā. Tātad, ja tu saki, ka tu visu saki 150, pārētos ielicis labāk, tas ir tāds biznes modelis. Negribu taisīt, bet tu jau divas ir aizveicis jau, un tad ir nākot, tu jau ražo līdz ierakstīs notiek, bet tu neesi pārāk.
Sorry? Procurement, that means that they cannot be independent if it's 165 and not 150 lumens per watt.
No, it depends on procurement. Yes? Any more questions up till now? No?
Question from my side. An experience, for example, we in practice have tender 100 luminaries or low luminary. If there is a thing that two of luminaries broke down, what you basically do, you take the example, go to the testing and see what is happening, why the luminary is broken. And what is the procedures after that? What you do with the luminaries if they are with bad quality? Do you understand my question?
I think so. Part of it, of course, is warranty from the manufacturer, so he has to warrant the product. Bad quality. The difficulty is what is bad quality, because that depends on your requirements and the requirements you set in advance. If you produce a product, will there be products that will be defective? Sure, you cannot prevent that. That will happen always. It should not happen a lot. The problem is not so, in general, in the beginning, a few will fail. manufacturer will be able to replace them and can replace them quickly. After that, your lifetime starts, and that's basically the problem. Because if I just make a drawing, if you look at starting here, you install the products. Then first of all, you will have some products failing, and then it basically runs like that. And then at the end of the lifetime, it goes up again. So that's basically the normal way of work. This is warranty, and this is something you should cover in procurement. Because this is lifetime. If this is after, let's say, 10,000 hours, it starts, then that's, you can go back to the manufacturer, but he probably will not give you any warranty, because he just gives warranty for 5 years, maybe. I'm not sure that everybody does that, but I think that's one of the general things. So this is not really a big issue, because they will solve that. They will replace the products. This is the big issue, and this is the one that you need to cover in your procurement requirements. And that's why I would say you have to ask the manufacturer to show the actual lifetime of the product. You have to set requirements in your procurement to cover that. That is the most complicated one in procurement, because safety, etc., it's easy to cover. And you can cover that, for example, with ENEC. So ask them for ENEC, you're covered for safety, you don't have to worry about it. For this part, it's most difficult. Also, ENEC Plus doesn't cover this part.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Well, I have a question exactly about this graph that you laid up. So basically, this whole talking about 100,000 hours of work time, so 25 years, it came from expenses that come with lead. Change.
Yeah, yeah.
So the lab products, they are complicated. They have not only those light source, but also drivers and controllers. And for those LEDs, they have extrapolation for longer periods of time.
Right.
But there is a problem with drivers or other components. So drivers, and what troubles me most, control.
Yeah.
So are there some standards that try to fulfill the same lifetime guarantee for the components?
There are standards that cover that. The problem is mainly on how to use those standards and how to interpret the standards and how to make them fit for your specific application. So let's say if you look at a driver, there are tests that you can use to test on when it will fail. But there are those tests, they assume certain conditions. And are those conditions also met in your application? That's always the difficulty here. And what you see is currently that the manufacturers that are really seriously working on this, they get 15,000 hours, 50,000 till 75,000 hours working time on drivers, so 10-15 years. And for LED modules, 20 years is general, I would say. And for controls, it's worse, because then you're looking at 5 to 10 years. And that's a major difficulty, because those standards, they are not always used, and they are also very difficult to test, because you need to do a lot of tests and takes a long time, and then generally quite expensive. It can be done. But can you put it in a procurement requirement? That's a difficulty. That's something you need to think about. Another thing that you need to think about is, for example, if you look at the driver, if the manufacturer declares 100,000 hours, that's nice, but then he also needs to specify the conditions, and normally they do. And then you see that, for example, surge voltages are not covered, and they need to be covered. Because the standard requirement from European Union covered in the EMC directive is only 1.5 kilovolts or 2 kilovolts, depending a little bit on the product. But in actual life, if you have street lighting, especially long cables, basically in the open street, on industrial areas or in rural communities, you have a very high chance on high surge voltages, going up to 5 or even more kilovolts. So it is important to specify then that you want to have a surge protection in there, for example. And so there are many more examples, of course, but those things you have to consider. Does that help you a little bit?
Well, yeah, just what my main to have those specific standards. What are the standards?
Yeah.
So I can write it down and to search and to read about it and figure it out.
I think we can work something out on that. I have several documents on that, but maybe it's good to write a note and then you can supply that to everybody, and I can put down the standards in there. Yeah. And you can make the translation. Yes? Any other? I think we will still cover some of the questions that were already given. And so when we go into procurement, so steps to define what to do in procurement. What requirement do you want to set? That's one. What is the level of confidence you want to have? What level of compliance assurance? How, or better said, how much risk do you want to take? Available solutions for compliance assurance you need to check, and then make a choice on the above.
Attiecīgi slaids par iepirkumiem, ko tad darīt tajos, iespējams, ka turpmākie slaidi vēl atbildēs uz kādiem jautājumiem, kas jums ir bijuši. Tie ir soļi, kā noteikt, ko darīt konkrētajā iepirkumā. Jums ir jānosaka, protams, kādas prasības jūs vēlaties izvirzīt, kāda veida atbilstības, nodrošināt kādu atbilstību, tātad cik daudz riska par neatbilstību jūs uzskatāt par pieņemamu, kāds būtu tas līmenis. Kā arī jūs varat uzreiz paskatīties, kādi ir iespējamie risinājumi atbilstības nodrošināšanai. Un, balstoties uz augstāk minēto, var arī pieņemt lēmumu.
So an example. So what requirements do you want to set? If you're looking at product safety requirements, you want to really have a product that is safe and complies with legislative requirements. And the main requirement in that case is the low voltage directive. That basically is the directive that says your product needs to be safe if you want to sell this into the European Union.
Un tātad pirmais piemērs, kādus prasības jūs vēlaties izvirzīt, un tātad viens no piemēriem ir, produktam ir jābūt drošam un jāatbilst likuma prasībām. Galvenā prasība ir zemsprieguma direktīva. Numurs nosaukts, ko šī direktīva nosaka, vienkārši to, ka produkts ir drošs un atbilst Eiropas Savienības likumam.
Just for your information, the low voltage directive is about low voltage, and low voltage is 230 volts. So the voltage that we have on our socket outlets.
Zemsprieguma direktīva ir par zemspriegumu par 230 voltiem. Tas ir tas, kas ir tīklā.
Many people think it's lower, but that's the low voltage.
Cilvēki domā, ka ir zemāk, bet tāda ir. Šis ir tas līmenis nosaukties.
The level of compliance assurance, I think that in this case a high level is advisable, so that you have a high level of compliance because you don't want to have unsafe products on your streets.
Un līmenis, kādā pārliecināties par atbilstību, es domāju, ka te ir jānosaka augsts līmenis, jo riskēt attiecīgi jūs nevēlaties, lai būtu riskants apgaismojums uz ielām.
So what kind of solutions do we have available in this case? So you can look at CE, which is self-declaration, and the confidence is minimal. CB certificate and report, confidence is medium because you have a ISO type 1A certification and it's independently certified, but it's not market surveyed. And then you have ENEC certificate or local safety marks, which are according to ISO type 5. So in that case, the confidence is very high.
Pieejamie risinājumi tad būtu atbilstībai, piemēram, CE pašdeklarācija ir minimāla pārliecība par šādu veidu certifikātu. Tad ir CB certifikāts ar ziņojumu, kur jau pārliecība ir vidēja. Tas tomēr ir arī ISO tipa 1A certifikāts. Tad ir ENEC certifikāts vai vietējā drošības certifikācijas zīme, kur ir augsta pārliecība, ISO noteikts K5 ar neatkarīgu. Ne tikai CB, tad ir ar neatkarīgu testēšanu, ENEC tieši tāpat, bet ir arī vēl ENEC gadījumā tirgus uzraudzība.
So, then you make a choice based on that information, and I would say, okay, you can ask for the ENEC certification or the local certification mark. What you have to think about always, especially in procurement or especially in the area where you are working in, let's say a private company, it's easy. They can simply say, I want that certification mark, and they can require that. But for you in public procurement, that's not so easy. A local certification mark you can require, but you always have to think about to write down that you also accept comparable approval marks. If you don't do that, they might say, oh, listen, now you let us go to only one approval mark. Specifically also in ENEC, I heard an example where somebody required an ENEC 10 certification. You cannot require that because ENEC 10 can only be issued by one test house. ENEC can be issued by many test houses. So if you require ENEC, you can put it in your tender, but you cannot put ENEC 10 or in our case, for example, ENEC 05. You cannot put that in a tender because then everybody has to go to that specific test house. But ENEC you can require.
Un, attiecīgi, tad jūs izdarāt izvēli balstoties uz savu augstāk noteiktajiem pašu kritērijiem. Un jūs tātad, piemēram, pieprasāt ENEC certifikātu vai vietējo certifikāta zīmi. Par to ir arī jādomā iepirkumos savā jomā. Privātām kompānijām ir vieglāk, tās var izvirzīt jebkādas prasības, bet publiskajos iepirkumos ir grūtāk. Piemēram, arī pieprasot lokālu veidu certifikācijas zīmi, ir svarīgi ielikt iekšā, ka salīdzinošu vai līdzīgu šo te apstiprināšanas zīmi vai apliecinājumu zīmi jūs arī pieņemat, jo tātad minēt piemēram ENEC 10 vai ENEC 05, kas uzliek par pienākumu certificēties konkrētā tikai vienā iespējams testēšanas centrā, bet ENEC savukārt, ko var testēt daudzos, tad var arī iekļaut prasībās.
You also have to consider one other issue. And that is the number of products you're going to buy. Are you buying a standard product or are you buying a specific, very special product that is only made for you? In the case of a standard product, ENEC is not a problem. Most manufacturers can supply ENEC certified products. But if you're looking at specials that are only made for you and in a limited number of products, then ENEC certification becomes questionable. So you have to think on other ways on securing the safety. Why is ENEC in that case questionable? ENEC testing has a price. And if you build 10,000 luminaires, that price is okay, it's no problem. It's just, let's say, small change on the price of a product. But if a manufacturer makes for you 5 specific products, then those products will become very expensive if they need to be completely ENEC certified. So in that case, you might want to select your supplier very specifically. You have to know that that supplier is really trustworthy and he has all the, let's say, conditions in place to make sure that his products are safe.
Vēl viena lieta, kas ir jāņem vērā, ir tāda, ka kāda veida produktu jūs iepērkat. Vai tas ir standartizēts produkts, kam var piemērot ENEC, un ar to nav nekāda problēma. Savukārt, ja tas ir kāds ļoti specifisks produkts, ierobežotā daudzumā vai tirāžā, kas ir nepieciešams tikai jums, ar ENEC var nebūt pietiekami, vai šis te varētu nebūt labākais risinājums. Kāpēc? Tāpēc, ka mēs runājam par drošību, ENEC certifikātam ir arī cena, un, protams, ka izlaiduma lielums, apjoms, ja to izdala pret šī certifikāta cenu, tad arī nosaka gala produktu cenu. Ja tas ir ierobežota daudzuma produkts, tad tas kļūs ļoti dārgs, ja tam piemēro pilnu ENEC certifikāciju. Līdz ar to vēlreiz pievērsiet tam uzmanību un izvēlēties uzticamu piegādātāju, kurš ir ievērojis visus jūsu noteiktos parametrus un nosacījumus.
So another example, initial performance. So what kind of products, what requirements do you want to set? The product photometric specification shall be correct. Or in other words, the information the manufacturer gives, you want to know for sure that that is correct.
Otrais piemērs, kādas prasības jūs vēlaties izvirzīt, un te runa ir par sākotnējo veiktspēju. Produktu fotometriskajām specifikācijām jābūt korektām. Tas nozīmē tādām, kā ir norādījis ražotājs.
Also there, I would say the risk of non-compliance, you have to look at that, and I would say a medium level would be advisable because this will probably be something that you will notice directly in the beginning. So if the light output is too low, you will have a too low light level on your street, and you can basically complain to the manufacturer immediately. However, you have to think about how big is the manufacturer, can he easily overcome this problem. So it might become a problem because of problems not compliant.
Un, attiecīgi, šeit es varu ieteikt jums tomēr arī pieļaut vidēja līmeņa atbilstības risku, jo neatbilstības gadījumā var attiecīgi labot konkrēto situāciju. Piemēram, tas pats gaismas parametru veiktspēja vai spiltums, ja tā neatbilst, tad var vērsties pie ražotāja ar tādu. Bet, protams, ka ir jāņem vērā vienkārši to, cik viegli būs attiecīgiem ražotājiem pārvarēt konkrēto problēmu.
I give you an example. A company in the Netherlands, small manufacturer, imports products from China, selling them in the Netherlands, sold them to a big municipality, Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. They put up the products and they started leaking, so water came in. The municipality asked for warranty. Company almost went bankrupt because they couldn't replace all those luminaires, and they had to close a deal with this company to make sure that they kept standing and were able to give warranty to the luminaires. They basically bought another set of new luminaires in addition to the ones they already had, and in the meantime they had to replace the old ones. So that's the complication that you can have if you go for a low level of compliance assurance.
Un tas bija viens piemērs no Nīderlandes, kad bija kāds mazs ražotājs, viņa piegādātāji ir no Ķīnas, un viņi attiecīgi savu produktu jau piegādāja Rotterdamas pašvaldībai. Izrādījās, ka šim te produktam ir sūce vai iekļūst ūdens, un attiecīgi šādus gaismas elementus viņi dēļ tā, ka viņi nevarēja tos arī pietiekamā daudzumā nomainīt, viņi gandrīz bankrotēja, bija jāvienojas par papildu garantijām, viņiem bija jāieved jau citi gaismas elementi, vienlaikus jānomaina jau esošie, tāpēc, ka ir ar šādu iepirkumu iepircējs uzņēmies zema līmeņa atbilstības nodrošināšanu.
Available solutions for initial performance. Again, of course, self-declaration, CB certificate is a possibility, and ENEC Plus certification, where self-declaration again is minimal, CB certificate is medium, and for ENEC Plus certification, you again have that ISO Type 5 confidence.
Kā norādīts slaidā, te ir pieejamie risinājumi. lai nodrošinātu atbilstību un attiecīgi tā būtu vai nu pašdeklarācija ar minimālu pārliecību, CB certifikāts un ziņojums ar vidēju līmeņa pārliecību par šādu risinājumu, jo tas ir ISO 1A tipa certifikācija vai arī ENEC plus certifikāts ar attiecīgo neatkarīgo testēšanu un augstu pārliecību.
So again, we make a choice. I would say in this case, ENEC Plus certificate would be a good choice, or CB certificate and report would also be quite a good choice. So depending on what you think is the confidence that you need.
Atkarībā no jums nepieciešamās pārliecības, attiecīgi varētu teikt, ka labi risinājumi šeit būtu ENEC Plus certifikāts vai CB certifikāts ar ziņojumu.
Third example, and now it becomes complex, and now we're basically going into your question. So looking at life expectancy for the LED module, generally it's L90B50, 100,000 hours that is requested. So just give you a short explanation. I don't know if everybody is aware of what it means. L90 means that at the end of the 100,000 hours, 90% of the light is left. So the output of the luminaire or output of the LED module is still 90% in comparison with the start where it was 100%. The B50 stands for the deviation. So 50% of the LED modules will have a higher light output than 90%, and the other 50% will be below 90%. So there's still quite a big deviation, but this is the general one that is used. In the meantime, those LEDs, in the past it was much more difficult because the LEDs had a big spread. But in the meantime, the quality of the LEDs is so good that the spread is quite narrow. So it's a very narrow spread. Of course, there will be failures of products, but that's not mentioned in the L90B50. So L90B50, that could be quite a good requirement. We see that quite a lot, that this is required for street lighting.
Šeit es neesmu droši, ka visi no jums arī sapratīs šādu apzīmējumu, bet runa ir par to, kādas prasības šeit izvirzīt. L90 ir 90% sagaidāmā dzīves ilguma beigās, kā ir atlikušais gaismas līmenis, B50 nozīmē 50% deviācija un nosauktais stundu skaits. Tas ir arī ar LED kvalitāti pieminēts, ka pagātnē tā iespējams bija problēma, bet LED kvalitāte ir uzlabojusies ar laiku.
So, what kind of solutions can we have here? And as you see, it becomes quite difficult because there's no certification for this. There's no certification on this lifetime issue. So medium level of compliance is, in my opinion, very advisable because the result of non-compliant products is in this area, in that end area when the manufacturer might no longer be there, or when the manufacturer at least doesn't give any warranty anymore. So it's important to make sure that that is covered. And yeah, so that's what I basically say. For example, 15 years supplier might no longer be existing, and proving non-compliance is difficult because basically of the discussion we had on the driver. If a driver is put in the field, it fails because of a surge protection, of no surge protection. If the driver fails due to surge voltages, you probably will not be eligible for warranty because the manufacturer will say, okay, the conditions are not good. You had surge voltage on your product, and that's not falling under warranty.
Un te ieteiktais atbilstības nodrošinājuma riska līmenis, es ieteiktu, tomēr ir vidējs. Pieminēts tas, ka šāda veida nodrošināšanai certifikāta nav tāds neeksistē, nav arī nekādas garantijas, attiecīgi kļūmes iespējamība ir tur, kur nebūs vairs ražotāja garantijas. un vēl nav garantijas arī, ka pēc tik daudziem gadiem tāds ražotājs vai piegādātājs vispār eksistē, un pieminēti arī driveru reālās dzīves eksploatācijas apstākļi, kuru gadījumā arī pierādīt neatbilstību būs ļoti grūti, jo ir voltāžas attiecīgi pārsniegums, un tas nav norādītais ražotāja.
So, what are the solutions available? Self-declaration, again, confidence is minimal. ISTMT report plus TM21 report issued by the manufacturer, so he basically is the same as self-declaration. ISTMT report plus TM21 report issued by an independent test institute, or the last one is by an accredited test institute. There's no certification mark, not at least one that I know of that will cover this issue. So these are the possibilities that you could use here.
Un te ir pieejamie risinājumi, pieminēšu gan vēlreiz nekādas certifikācijas zīmes, kas atrisinātu attiecīgo atbilstības problēmu. Tādas vienkārši neeksistē, un pieejamie risinājumi ir pašdeklarācija ar minimālu pārliecību, ISTMT testu ziņojums plus TM21 ziņojums, ko pats ražotājs izdod, kā tā ir pašdeklarācija, ISTMT testu ziņojums ar TM21 ziņojumu no neatkarīgas testu organizācijas un ISTMT testu ziņojums ar TM21 ziņojumu, ko izdod arī neatkarīga akreditēta testu iestāde.
So just for those who don't know, ISTMT means in situ test, temperature measurement test, which means that you basically measure the temperatures inside of the product, of the LEDs, of the LED module, of the driver in the actual final application. And the TM21 is a report which is basically the extrapolation of LM80, another standard, but the LM80 standard defines how to test LEDs on life expectancy. That information plus the information from the ISTMT combined in the TM21 report basically gives you the lifetime expectancy of the LED module.
Un par tiem, kas iespējams nezina, ko nozīmē ISTMT, tas ir institūta temperatūras mērījumu testa ziņojums. To mēra jau gatavā pielietojamā LED modulī un driverā vai driverī. Un TM21 ir atkal tehniski tātad LM80 ekstrapolāciju, kas apvienojumā TM21 ziņojumā dod jau sagaidāmo dzīves ilgumu produktam.
So, again, last step, making the choice based on the above, excluding or including additional measures. For example, ISTMT report plus TM21 report issued by an independent test institute. That is very common and is very trustworthy, I would say, or by an accredited test institute. One of the requirements I would set at least for this issue. Of course, when you... Oh, sorry.
Un tas trešais piemērs, kā vienmēr trešajā piemērā, arī te ir jāizdara izvēle balstoties uz augstāk nosaukto un kādas pārliecību vai kādu risku jūs vēlaties attiecīgi uzņemt. ISTMT tests plus TM21 ziņojums, ko izdod neatkarīga testu iestāde, ļoti plaši pielietojamā izvēle, vai arī no neatkarīgas akreditētas testa iestādes, es arī noteiktu, lai risinātu jau konkrētas problēmas.
So what I tried to say and what I showed is that it becomes more complex depending on what you want to do. Showing compliance with legal requirements, with safety requirements are relatively easy. You can do that quite simple by requiring, for example, an ENEC certification. Performance requirements becomes much more difficult. It depends on what kind of issue you want to cover.
Un te arī ir tātad runa par to, kādi ir apsvērumi kvalitātes parametriem. Tas viss paliek sarežģītāks atkarībā no tā, ko vēlaties vai ko vēlaties aptvert. Ja tā ir atbilstība likumiem vai drošības prasībām, tad jūs varat iegūt ENEC certifikātu. Tas būtu vieglākais, bet savukārt veiktspējas gadījumā tas jau ir sarežģītāk. Viss ir atkarīgs no jūsu nepieciešamības.
So looking at lighting, which requirements, European requirements, legal requirements can be applicable or are applicable. So let's say low voltage directive is in general applicable because all the products are connected to the normal supply. So low voltage directive is always applicable, and the EMC directive as well, especially on LED lighting because there's active electronics in there. So EMC directive is applicable as well. ROS directive is also applicable because these products are products that need to comply with the low voltage directive and therewith also with the ROS directive. Then we have the single lighting regulation. That one is a little bit more complex because it depends a little bit on how the product is set up. The single lighting regulation is applicable to light sources and not to luminaires. But luminaire can be a light source depending on how the luminaire is built. So the single lighting regulation might be applicable. And in many cases is applicable. And it is anyway applicable to the light source and the driver. The driver and light source need to comply with single lighting regulation anyway. Last one that could be applicable is the radio equipment directive. And when is the radio equipment directive applicable? Is as soon as there's something in there that transmits any signal. For example, Wi-Fi or LoRa or Zigbee or whatever you put in, you can put in there that transmits through the air, not infrared, by the way, but that transmits information through a radio. If that is the case, the radio equipment directive is also applicable.
CE prasības te ir minētas attiecīgās direktīvas, zemesprieguma direktīvas, kurai ir jābūt atbilstīgai, jo tās ir tātad ierīces, kuras tiek izmantotas šādos apstākļos zemesprieguma. Tad ir ENEC direktīva, ROHS direktīva. Pirmās divas tad vienmēr ir atbilstība tām noteikta. Ar SLR direktīvu minēts, ka gaismas avots nav tas pats, kas gaismas elements, un tad ir jāskatās, kāds šeit tad regulējums ir piemērojams un vai tas ir drivers. Savukārt radio aprīkojuma direktīva nosaka atbilstību tad, ja produkts arī izstaro vai pārraida nodot kādu informāciju Wi-Fi, Zigbee.
So what would be advisable to put in procurement, at least that they need to comply with the CE requirements. And that you ask for at least a self-declaration, so the CE declaration from the manufacturer. And you can check if the correct directives are mentioned. So at least 1, 2, and 3 needs to be mentioned. 4 needs to be mentioned only if you cannot take out the light source. And 5 needs to be mentioned if there's also a radio inside the equipment. But one important issue to understand is if your luminaire is equipped, for example, with a Zaga connector, the luminaire itself needs to be CE compliant and the radio equipment directive will not be applicable. The radio equipment directive will then only be applicable to the node that is used and that can put on top of the luminaire. But that's a separate product.
Attiecīgi tas var kalpot kā tāds kontrols saraksts, ka jūs pieprasāt atbilstību CE prasībām ar ražotāju pašu deklarāciju, un attiecīgi tad jau jūs varat pārbaudīt, vai attiecīgajām direktīvām šis produkts atbilst. 1, 2, 3 obligāti, 4, ja nav iespējams izņemt gaismas elementu, un 5, ja tas nodod kādu signālu. Pieminēt arī zāga konektori, kas ir atsevišķs produkts.
Okay, looking at the qualitative parameters again, looking at safety, we have to deal with electrical safety, and electrical safety is covered by the European standard EN 6598, which consists of about 22 different parts, and one part is specifically for street lighting, that's part 3. But we often also see used other parts for street lighting. For example, for if you use them on parking lots and you have a different standard, you have part 5 or part 2 if it's in tunnels, for example, or part 1 even in tunnels. So it depends a little bit on where you use the product. What does it cover? The 5 basic safety requirements that come from electrical safety, which is electric shock hazard, mechanical hazards, thermal hazards, fire hazard, and radiation hazard.
Arī riski, runājot par drošību, tad elektriskās drošības standarts to nosaka EN 60598 drošības standarts. Un tam ir tātad 22 daļas, jau apgaismojums uz to attiecas lielākoties trešā daļa, ja tas stāv auto stāvvietās, tad arī 5. un ir situācijas, kad vēl arī 2. daļa. Par ko tas ir? Tas ir par elektrotrieciena risku, mehānisko risku, termisko risku, uzliesmojumu vai uguns risku un radiācijas risku.
So, shortly go through those hazards. Electric shock hazard is touch safety, the insulation of unsafe voltages, so 230 volts. And also IP protection. Many people think that IP protection is not included in the safety standard, but it is included, and you need to comply with this. Also, sorry, go ahead.
Jā, te ir tad apkopējums par to, ko nozīmē elektrotrieciena risks vai apdraudējums. Tam ir jābūt drošam uz pieskārienu, 230 volti, izolācija un nedrošā voltāža, jeb spriegums 230 volti un arī IP aizsardzība. Daudzi nezina, ka tas ir ietverts arī šajā riskā.
So from a mechanical part, you look at glass breakage, wind force, housing strength, which are important factors that are tested.
Vēl svarīgi faktori, kas tiek testēti no mehāniskās drošības puses. Mēs runājam par iespēju salauzt stiklu, vēja spēka noturība vai korpusa spēcīgums, mehāniskā drošība.
I think I see a question.
This is
4 jautājums.
IK test.
Yes and no. I'll explain. We have mechanical testing, which is just a standard testing that's required in the standard. But you can have a situation where you want to have a better mechanical protection. For example, on those places where general public can reach the luminaire. So let's say you want to have luminaire here, you can comply with IEC 6598, no further discussion. But now you want to use it outside on this level, for example. You might want to have some additional protection. Not for safety, but mainly I call it vandal proofing, to make sure that vandals don't. So for the mechanical safety, according to the low voltage directive, there you have a set of requirements that are covered by the EN 6598. But as soon as you want to have additional protection, you go to IK testing, which is a different step.
Yeah.
Correct.
Jautājums bija par to, vai tas atbilstīja kā testēšanai, tika paskaidrots, kā negluži, jo attiecīgais standarts attiecas uz apgaismojumu vai gaismas elementu, kuru nav iespējams sasniegt, jau aizsniegt. Ja ir iespēja aizsniegt, tad jau tā ir attiecīgi mehāniskā drošība, kā drošība pret vandalismu, iznīcināšanu tādā veidā, ja to ir iespējams aizsniegt.
Then we have the thermal hazards, and that is component temperatures. They cannot become too high. Material temperature limits, for example, plastics that are used in the product. Prolonged exposure to heat, especially on seals and so on. They have to be able to withstand that. The resistance to heat is tested, and touch temperatures, so wherever you can touch the product. With street lighting, that's not a real big issue because I cannot reach it in general, but that is could be an issue.
Kvalitātes parametri attiecībā uz drošību termālā sadaļa, tas būtu komponentu temperatūras, tas ir materiālu pielietoto temperatūru limiti, tas ir atkarīgs no pielietotās produktā plasmasas, tad ir pakļaušana karstumam, jeb paaugstinātai temperatūrai ilgākā laika posmā, attiecīgi noturība pret šo te karstumu un pieskārienu temperatūras. Atkal, ja to gaismas elementu nav iespējams aizsniegt, tad tā nav problēma.
Then you have the fire hazard, which can be ignition of materials and the flame retardants that are used to make sure that if a plastic catches fire, it won't spread the fire basically.
Drošības kvalitātes parametri attiecībā uz uguns drošību, nu tā tad ir uzliesmojums vai pielietojamie materiāli arī nedeg tālāk, ja tie jau ir aizdegušies.
And then finally, the last hazard that you have in electrical safety, in this case for lighting, is radiation hazard, because there's light coming out of the product. And then we look at photobiological safety and basically the risk group assessment.
Un sadaļā radiācija, tā ir fotobioloģiskā drošība un riska grupu novērtējums. Kas attiec uz apgaismojumu visas šīs sadaļas?
And on special request, I've added this graph, and just to try and explain a little bit on photobiological safety and how to look at that.
Man īpaši palūdzu, tāpēc es iekļāvu šādu te grafiku par fotobioloģisko drošību.
So looking at that, you basically see here on the y-axis the exposure. So how much light basically you will receive, and that can be in your eye or on your skin or whatever. So the light exposure. The other thing that is important with photobiological safety is the time, I see it's in Dutch, I'm sorry for that. The time that you are basically exposed to that light.
Un ir skaidrojums, tabula ir arī holandiešu valodā, ka uz Y-as atrodas ekspozīcija, jeb tas, cik daudz mēs esam pakļauti šīs gaismas iedarbībai, uz X-as ir laiks.
If you look at radiation hazard in lighting, we have several hazards. You have UV hazard, you have blue light, you have infrared, far red. So there are many areas where you have possible problems. The main thing that we look at in general lighting, and that the standard is basically looking at, is blue light, because the LEDs that we use also in street lighting are based on blue LEDs.
Un, kas attiec uz fotobioloģiskās drošības riskiem attiecībā uz apgaismojumu, to sadaļas, protams, ir dažādas UV, infrasarkanās un zilā gaisma, kas var radīt problēmas. LED gadījumā mēs runājam par zilās gaismas risku, jo mēs tādu veidu diodes izmantojam.
It's always important to see what is actually used on LEDs, because it can also be laser based, for example, or it could be UV LED based, or for example in horticulture we see that they are not only using UV and blue LEDs, but they are also using infrared LEDs or far red LEDs, and in that case the hazards become completely different. This graph is mainly looking at blue light hazard.
Šis grafiks tātad vēlreiz attiecas vairāk uz zilās gaismas risku, bet ir jāpiemina, ka ir jāskatās konkrēti uz pielietojamiem elementiem pašā LED, vai tas ir balstīts uz lāzeru vai UV. Augkopībā, piemēram, pielieto arī infrasarkanos gaismas elementus.
In general, the way you evaluate the other areas of light is exactly the same as shown here. So we basically have 4 groups, exempt or risk group 0, risk group 1, risk group 2 and risk group 3.
Un tieši tāpat kā ar citu apdraudējumu, mēs skatāmies uz 4 grupām. Riska grupa 0, riska grupa 1, 2 un attiecīgi 3.
Exempt means you can be exposed to that light as long as you want, but there will never be any effect.
Riska grupa 0, jeb tāds, kas risku vispār nerada, tas ir, jūs varat būt tam pakļauti cik vien ilgi vēlaties, un nekādas ietekmes no tā nebūs.
Risk group 1, the light intensity is such that if you have a long enough exposure, you might have a health risk. But the light is in such a way that your reflexes, your natural response will be to turn away from the light, to no longer look into the light because it's too intense. It's irritating to your eyes, for example.
Riska grupa numur 1 ir tāda, kas rada veselības riska iestāšanos noteiktā laika posmā, ja tam ir pakļauta, bet arī tā gaisma pati par sevi ir tāda, ka mūsu refleksi mums liek, piemēram, uz to vairs neskatīties, jo tā, kā redzi, piemēram, kairina.
Risk group 2, it's another level up. You will close your eyes, you will turn away, your automatic reflex will be fast enough to turn away from the light.
Riska grupa numur 2 arī saistīta ar veselības risku iestāšanos, bet šī gaisma arī pat par sevi ir tāda, ka cilvēks aiztaisīs acis, novērsīsies un pietiekami ātri.
Risk group 3, you will not be able to turn your head away fast enough before damage occurs.
Bet savukārt 3. riska grupā tā jau ir tā ekspozīcija vai pakļaušana tādai gaismai, kur mēs nespējam pietiekami ātri no tās novērsties.
So, looking at lighting. These measurements are done at a very close distance to the light source.
Apgaismojuma gadījumā šos mērījumus veids salīdzinoši īsā attālumā no gaismas avota.
Risk group exempt or risk group 0, risk group 1 are allowed without any problem, so you can use them.
Riska grupa 0 un 1 bez nekādām problēmām ir atļauta, tās var izmantot.
Risk group 2 can be used, but in case of risk group 2, you need to take precautions. You need to make sure, you need to guarantee basically that the distance from the person using the illumination or the lights is far enough from the light source so that the amount of light is reduced to risk group 1 or exempt.
Ar riska grupu numur 2 arī to pielietot drīkst un ir iespējams, bet ir jāveic konkrēti drošības pasākumi un pēc būtības jāgarantē, ka šis izgaismojums, pats gaismas avots ir pietiekamā attālumā no cilvēka vai lietotāja, ka tā riska faktors ir samazināts un iestājas kā riska grupai 1 vai 0.
Everything is based on the user and the people who are using the lights basically. You have to keep in mind that there's also people servicing the lights. So if you're servicing a light with risk group 2 or risk group 1, you need to take safety precautions as a service engineer as well.
Viss, protams, ir atkarīgs arī no lietotāja, kādā veidā tas ir pakļauts šādas gaismas iedarbībai, kā viņš lieto, bet ir jāpaturprātā arī cilvēki, kas šādus gaismas avotus vai elementus apkalpos riska grupā numur 2 vai 1, ir konkrēti priekšnoteikumi jāņem vērā un drošības pasākumi jāveic.
If you look at the use of risk group 2 luminaires in horticulture, for example, so in greenhouses, etc., they are used quite often. The levels of light are very intense, but you can control the environment very closely. So the employer can make sure that everybody that goes in that needs to do some work wears the safety goggles and make sure that they are not exposed to too much light. In those cases, it's also UV, so it's also the skin protection, etc. It's not only safety goggles.
Un riska grupa numur 2, te runa vairāk būtu, piemēram, par augkopību, par siltumnīcām. Tur gaisma, ir intensīva un tomēr ir iespējams veikt un kontrolēt šos attiecīgos pasākumus, darba drošību, ievērot valkāt acenes un tādā veidā kontrolēt arī to, vai UV vai āda, darbinieka āda tiek pakļaut UV iedarbībai.
So looking at street lighting, I would say exempt or risk group 1 would be advisable. Risk group 2, I would really think about if you want to do that, use that, because you don't control so closely the environment. You don't know what's exactly happening on the street.
Un tieši šī piemēra dēļ ielu apgaismojumam es domāju, ka ir nepieciešama riska grupa 1 vai 0, nevis riska grupa 2, kad mēs nespējam kontrolēt, kas notiek uz ielām. Mēs šo lietotāju grupu vienkārši nespējam vadīt.
Make sense?
Yeah, sorry, question. It goes together also with the glare rating?
No, it doesn't go together, but actually you could say if it's risk group 2, the glare will be high because the intensity on the LED will be very high.
Okay.
So probably yes, but you cannot say there's a direct relation. If you are in risk group 2, you will have a high glare. That depends on the construction of the luminaire, on how it is put in the street, on how your field of view will be when you are looking at the luminaire.
You can reduce the power consumption and the optics, and then you can get a better.
Everything is a compromise. Huh? Okay, one step further, performance. You could look at photometric, electric, and life expectancy. So also there I made a small but not necessarily complete list. Photometric, we're talking about flux, how much light is coming out of the luminaire, the light distribution, where does it end up? Does it end up on the sidewalk or only on the street? Does it end up where you want it to have? CRI, CCT, color temperature, and efficacy. Those things could be of interest, where efficacy could be a photometric or a electrical parameter. You can have a debate on that. Looking at electric, power input of course is important. Power factor is very important. I wouldn't forget power factor because of LED being such a low power that especially under the 25 watts, luminaires under the 25 watts, do not have to comply with the stringent requirements above 25 watts, which can lead to problems. And surge protection, that's basically one that we already mentioned a few times. That is also very important to think about what you want to require. Life expectancy, lumen maintenance, that's one of the we have here. Corrosion protection, for example, could be an interesting thing to look at, especially if you're close to the sea or in a harbor environment. Corrosion protection becomes more and more important. But also UV protection, especially when we're talking about plastics. They can really degrade quite quickly if there's not enough UV protection.
Apkopojums par kvalitātes parametriem, uz kuriem ir jāpievērš uzmanība. Iespējams, nav arī pilnīgs šis saraksts, bet attiecībā uz veiktspēju, vai tie fotometriskie rādītāji, elektriskie rādītāji, dzīves ilguma rādītāji, veiktspējā pie fotometriskajiem rādītājiem. Tie būtu gaismas daudzums, gaismas izkliede, kur šī gaisma atrodas uz ceļa braucamās daļas, uz ietves, CRI, CZT, gaismas temperatūra un, protams, arī efektivitāte. Vēl pie veiktspējas elektriskie ievads jaudas faktors, pārsprieguma aizsardzība, pie veiktspējas arī dzīves ilgums, lūmenu uzturēšana, korozijas aizsardzība, ja atrodas objekts pie jūras un UV aizsardzība.
Do I have a little bit extra time? Because I think we have 5 minutes left. Yeah? Okay, good. So, practical implementation, how to look at it. For legal requirements, at least require C declaration and check if the correct directives and regulations are mentioned, like I gave in one of the slides before.
Praktiskajā pielietojumā tad vēlos norādīt uz to, ka ko tātad kontrolēt, uz ko skatīties, lai būtu atbilstība juridiskajām prasībām, pieprasiet CE deklarāciju kā minimums un pārbaudiet, vai attiecīgās direktīvas un regulas ir pieminētas.
So from safety and performance, I would say a requirement of ENEC and ENEC Plus would be advisable. What is important always with ENEC and ENEC Plus, with certification in general, I have to say, to check if the product that is offered is also mentioned on the certificate. It has to really be the same, because otherwise it's not certified. Another thing that might be one advisable thing is to check if the certification mark is actually on the product. Because if the certification mark is not on the product, then it might mean that the product is not certified. check if the ratings are correct. You can compare the ratings that are on the certificate with the ratings on the type plate and check the validity of the certificate. And I will get back to that.
Attiecībā uz drošību un veiktspēju pieprasiet ENEC+, tas būtu ļoti ieteicams. Pārbaudiet to, vai konkrētajā certifikātā ir pieminēts produkta tips, tas arī ir svarīgi tam pievērst uzmanību, un arī tam, vai uz paša produkta ir certifikācijas zīme. Pretējā gadījumā tam produktam patiesībā nemaz arī nav šāda certifikāta. Tad vēl ir jāpārbauda, vai reitings ir atbilstoši pareizs un vai certifikāts vispār ir spēkā.
For other requirements, you can request a declaration in case of low risk of non-compliance and proof of compliance from a third party, and it could be a test report or whatever to show that the product is really compliant with those requirements.
Citos kvalitātes kritērijos jūs varat pieprasīt zema riska neatbilstības gadījumā varat pieprasīt deklarāciju, bet ja nepieciešams un ja vēlaties, var pieprasīt arī pierādījumu no trešās puses, jeb akreditētas testēšanas centra, ja ir vidējs vai augsts neatbilstības risks.
Practical implementation continued. Check validity of certificates. I gave you 2 sites here, but I will show you in just a minute how that works. And I have another one for the accreditations. I will show you that one as well.
Tika parādīts mājaslaps, kā iepriekš minēts, ka certifikātus ir iespējams pārbaudīt attiecīgajās mājaslapās, kas ir redzams uz ekrāna, kā arī akreditācijas, un bija doma, pēdējā slaidā ir vai Nīderlanda vai Latvijā ir iespējams pārbaudīt akreditācijas. Kā tas strādā, tūlīt parādīšu.
Just give me 1 second. Or maybe 2. So if you go to the ethics website, so one of the links that I showed, then you will find this form. So if I just go to the main site, then you will see here licensed products, and if you click on that, you come to this form, and here you can fill in information. So let's say that we put in street lighting, luminaires for road and street lighting, this one for example, and then you can search. And then you will find certified products. So as you can see, there are many street lighting certifications, 489 I see. So many products are ENEC certified, and to understand this, if you have one ENEC certificate, it can be many different products that are certified in one certificate. So there are quite a lot of certificates here. Maybe I can just select one, I don't know, this one is not familiar, but that doesn't really matter. If you click on it, then you can find the details. Seemingly DECRA issued this one.
Tas ir piemērs par to, kā pašā etikas mājaslapā var atrast šos te produktus. Tur ir sadaļa licencētie produkti, tad jūs ievadat visu nepieciešamo informāciju. Šajā gadījumā tika ievadīts par ielu apgaismojuma, ielu apgaismojuma sadaļa, kas parādīja to, ka tur bija 480 šie pāri, bet vai tas ir domāts certifikātu vai sarakstu lapu ar certifikātiem. Tātad ļoti daudz produktu, kas ir certificēti, un tajos jūs varat meklēt. Tad tika uzspies uz tātad nejauši atlasītas lapas, kurā arī bija tieši dekras izsniegtais certifikāts, un vēl ir jāpaturprātā, ka zem viena certifikāta var arī būt vairāki produkti. Tātad to ir ļoti daudz. Kas ir certificēti? Šeit jūs varat pārbaudīt to atbilstību tam, kas tiek uzrādīts jums.
And why do I think this is important? Because we have people in the world who are really good in fabricating certificates. We have seen that was a long time ago, but manufacturers coming up with certificates And they basically changed type numbers. They changed manufacturers' names and they used certificates from others. With this system in place, and this is from ethics then, but every test house has its own system. You can check if those certificates are actual and real. So that's always important to check.
Kāpēc ir svarīgi pārbaudīt? Tāpēc, ka, protams, ir jāpaturprātā dzīvojam pasaulē, kurā šādus certifikātus arī vilto. Un līdz ar to tad ir testēšanas centri, kuriem ir savas procedūras. Tāpēc arī te attiecīgi ētikas mājaslapā kā viens no variantiem ir to, kā to pārbaudīt. Nu, un, protams, ka viltojuma pazīmes var būt visdažādākās.
And here I have the Latvian accreditation organization, Latea. And here you can also find back the accredited bodies in Latvia. So here you can check if a test house has an accreditation, and there you can see what kind of accreditation. So the scope basically explains what they have accredited. So if I check in Latvia and I check on luminaire, I see here that this is TÜV Nord. They have an accreditation where they can test luminaires. So let's see, yeah, just luminaires, so on electrical safety. So here you can find that back. And for example, just to give you another idea, this is for Latvia. But if you look at the Dutch accreditation organization, there, for example, you will find back.
Iepriekšējais piemērs bija par to, kā meklēt arī pašas akreditācijas organizācijas un tajā, ko tās var attiecīgi certificēt.
And there you can see the accreditation of DECRA. And you can, for example, see for what DECRA was accredited in the Netherlands.
Savukārt otrs piemērs ir Nīderlandes akreditācijas padome un tiek uzmeklēta DECRA, lai redzētu, kāda akreditācija ir tai.
And if we then look for the 6598, you will see that all of the standard 6598 we have an accreditation. So for every organization that claims to have an accreditation, you have to find on the certificate, it will be claimed that it is done under accreditation. And as soon as it's there, you can check on the website from that accreditation organization if that organization, that laboratory is actually accredited.
Organizācija izsniedz savu certifikātu un tā atbilstības, tad šis numurs, piemēram, EN 6598 ir minēts, un tiklīdz jūs tādu saņēmuši, jūs varat pārbaudīt akreditācijas, vai šai organizācijai vispār ir šādā veidā.
So going back, just looking back at this practical implementation. So use standards, rules and requirements, quality issues. What do you want to know? That's the things you first need to think of. Then the reliability, what is what you want? What do you think is important? Can be self-declaration, third-party testing or accredited third-party testing. And finally, the certification process. Is it a one-shot or an ISO type 5, for example?
Praktisks piemērs pielietojumā atkal kā kontrols saraksts, kas ir jāņem vērā attiecībā uz saturu, pielietotie standarti, noteikumi, prasības, kvalitātes, problēmas vai jautājumi, ko tieši jūs vēlaties zināt, izturība vai uzticamība, vai to nosaka pašdeklarācija, vai trešo pušu testēšana, vai pat akreditētu trešo pušu testēšana un certifikācijas process, cik tas ir svarīgs, vai tā ir viena šī saskarsmes punkta ISO tips 1A, vai arī attiecīgais kurš tips jums ir nepieciešams.
Questions?
I have a question about ENEC certificates. For example, if the producer has received an ENEC certificate in 2022, and if the standard is upgraded in some kind of in 2023, do the producer have to make a new ENEC certificate?
Yeah, but there's a transition period.
I see.
Because normally there's a transition period of 3 years. 3 to 5, but generally it's 3 years. So so if you have issued, let's say, January, it's still the old edition, and in February it's the new edition. So in January we certify, then that certificate remains valid for 3 years.
I see, okay.
Yeah, and in those 3 years he needs to update.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long does this ENEC certification takes process for the product testing?
The actual process is about 10-15 days of testing, but that's not a lead time because we need more time and planning, etc. So normally it's 6 weeks we take for it, but that depends, of course, on test house. It will be different in every test house. Yep.
What about ATEX and emergency light testing? This is additional testing?
ATEX?
ATEX and emergency light testing.
So emergency lighting testing is exactly the same, only the requirements are much stringent because you have to comply with minimum performance requirements. So just to give you an idea, street lighting must be safe, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Sounds a bit strange, but that's the way to look at it. Emergency lighting needs to work because it's an emergency, so you need to have light. So there's much more testing involved in making sure that when there's a problem that it actually works. Okay. That's on emergency lighting. ATEX is a completely different situation because that's explosion safety. So it needs to comply with the safety requirements, plus a lot of extra requirements regarding the explosion, type of explosion area where it is used. But that's a separate certification, also a separate European directive. So it's a really completely different area. Yeah.
So maybe I would have a question. So we have very different streets and street profiles. It's also a challenge for a lighting engine, so to fulfill the end class. So what can I play around with? I mean, optics, can I play around also with some LED plates, not to lose the ENEC? So if I claim I have ENEC, but I can change to get done the very special street profile, for example.
For looking at, basically we always have to look at what are you doing and what is the implication for safety. So if you want to play around with lenses, the material is important for us because it must be fire retardant, etc. So it cannot spread fire. But for the rest, if the lens is wide or less wide, or for safety, doesn't really matter. So for the ENEC certification, that's easily to be adapted or doesn't even need to be adapted. Case of changing the LED module, that's a different case because the temperatures will change, the creepage distance clearances will change, so there might be implications for safety as well as soon as you start to change the LED configuration.
But for example, that situation, there is one luminaire type model certified by ENEC, and then the second one, a bit different as you mentioned, the optic engine and so on. Now I take from that and put that in. Is that okay or also? So who is the engine and the optics is okay?
Yes, you always have to think about what is the implication. So look at the luminaire. If you change the LED module, you change the heat in the luminaire, you change creepage distance and clearances, so it needs to be evaluated. Are you changing the driver? Has major complications because you're having different voltages, different isolations, different temperatures, etc. So you need to look at that. Changing a screw, if it's the same type of screw, it's the same size or even a bigger size, really doesn't really matter. Changing the sealing, yes, sure, that will have implications and we need to do partial retesting. So it depends exactly on what you are changing, if retesting is needed, yes or no. But the official way to look at it, if you change anything in the luminaire, you need to consult the test house. We want to prevent that because that would get too many questions. So if it doesn't influence the safety of the product, then you can basically change. Any further questions?
One question about the lens. Does the lens needs testing? Because if you change the lens for the luminary, do you need to make the test?
Jain. I will shortly explain. If you make the angle wider, I don't have to do anything. If you keep the material the same, I don't have to do anything. If you change the material, I have to check if the material is still flame retardant. If you keep the material the same, you widen the angle, no problem. If you narrow the angle, then we need to check for photobiological safety because your level of intensity will grow. So actually, it does depend on what you are doing. Generally, what we do is test the small angles. At large angles, we don't care. Small angles, we need to test for photobiological safety. Materials of lenses will normally remain the same. Sometimes they want to change it. Then we only have to test for flame retardancy, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah? If you use glass, it's easier, right? Because then only the angle becomes important because flame retardancy you don't have to test on glass lenses. So it also depends on the material that you use. So many things need to be thought about before you can decide. Any further questions? No? Yes? No? Okay. Okay, then
Can you mention typical figures for surge protection?
normal is 5 kV, but we also see a lot of times 8 or 10 kV.
10 kilovolts.
Yep. It's starting to become more and more common.
Is there a standard for it?
Yes, for testing of the surge protectors, there's a standard. Yeah. Don't ask me the number, I don't know that out of my head, but there's a standard for that. And what is important to understand is that the standard requirement from that's coming from the EMC requirements is 1.5 or 2.5 kilovolts. So that's very low, and for household use that's perfect. But for using that in rural areas or in industrial areas, that is debatable. So you really need higher levels. Yeah. Okay, then once again, thank you for the invite. I was really happy to be here, and I hope I gave you some useful information. Yeah, I wish you a pleasant continuation of this day. Thank you very much.